Good morning, everyone. So let's go ahead. Let me put this down. All right. All right. So as we start today, go ahead and put your mics on mute if you haven't, and then we'll kind of get through today. But a few notes before we begin. I cannot stress enough that these past 8 weeks, I promise you that I just scratched the surface of the things that are in the book. The book is very interactive. Right when I make points, there's a place to study. There's reflective questions. There's over 400 scriptures quoted contextually in the verse. I have you do deep dive studies. So go deeper and get the book. I promise you that you'll get a lot out of it. And that $4 a book is not going to help pay for college, but I just know that if you want to go deeper, definitely get the book. We just scratched the surface, and it's really meant to be a deep dive book for men. And also, I just want to thank Phil, just so kind enough to record these sessions. I didn't get session 1, but I plan on recording session 1 this week and adding all the recordings to my YouTube channel in the next week. So get the link from the bottom of notes that Phil's been sending out. There's a YouTube link there where I under links, and go ahead and subscribe, and I'll create a whole small group channel. They'll be great for a small group or a Sunday school class, or however you want to do it. Just kind of go through the videos again, or just kind of take a look at them again if you want to go deeper on those topics. So again, thanks a lot for that, Phil. So as we pop in, all right, so here's the slide. Today we're on point number 7. Now, last week we focused on being a man of charity and not indifference. And charity didn't have to do with giving a charity, some guys thought, which I thought was funny. Maybe that's why some of you guys missed last week. So we'll just leave that alone. But I talked about the unpacking of the unique word for love that's actually unique to Christianity, agape love, which your Bible translates simply as love, but there's actually 4 Greek words for love, and only 3 are used in the Bible. The 4th one, that has to do with feeling, storge, is not in the Bible, actually. But when we think of love, this is what we tend to think of. And unfortunately, we miss the power of what God has when he means agape love. And some of your word for word translations will try to distinguish this type of love with the word charity. And this is where we get that virtue. Charity, or agape love, is a one-way, unconditional, sacrificial form of love where you are the sacrifice. And there's a reason why charity is known as the binding virtue, is key to binding our relationships together, binding our hearts with another. Well, this week we're going to focus on hope. Hope is known as the motivating virtue. So when a Christian uses the word hope, though, he doesn't mean blind optimism or wishful thinking. That's kind of this modern idea of hope, which is to wish for something without any real expectation of knowing whether or not you will attain what we wish for. This secular modern view of hope is based on fate and chance, good luck, serendipity. Unfortunately, men, I hope has become as empty as I believe. But when the blackness of despair comes, any man knows that false hope is actually no hope at all. So we're going to jump into the Greek word used for hope here in the Bible is elpis. It means a confidence while waiting with the expectation of obtaining that which is desired. And the symbol for hope is an anchor. And the Greek word agora means an arm especially bent to receive a burden. The theological virtue of hope is based on the reality of God's existence and is rooted in the truth of his word and his promises. As my former pastor, Longsuffering, used to say, Christianity is based on a know-so hope, not a hope-so hope. The anchor is actually one of the oldest symbols in Christianity. It can be found throughout the catacombs. A symbol is based on Hebrews 6:19, which says, quote, this hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast. If you think for a moment about what an anchor does, it's suitable for hope to receive and hold our burdens, right? When a storm breaks out on the sea, you drop anchor to hold you steady through the storm so you do not despair or lose focus or direction on where you're heading. Likewise, just like the storms at the sea don't last forever and the storms of life that don't last forever, we need hope as an anchor. So it anchors us as something so we remain steady and don't despair. Well, guess what? For an anchor to really catch on to something, that have that bend to receive a burden, it has to hold on to a rock and not sand. So what an amazing visual, for Jesus is our rock in our hope. So in short, despair is the disease and hope is the cure. The properties or the sub-virtues of hope include freedom, assurance, trust, contentment, peace, confidence, perseverance, and long suffering. And the properties are those of despair or cynicism, right? Despair is the cynicism, unbelief, helplessness and hopelessness, and a doubt, like a deep doubt, not a normal doubt. It's okay if you doubt. It's what you do with your doubts. But it just grips you, and where you doubt the very existence of God and his care for you and everything else. So I'm going to unpack two particular properties I hope to have highlighted here: perseverance and long suffering, because they are linked. And if you remember the virtue of fortitude, right? Fortitude, and then you have the vice is fear. Well, fortitude shares the property of perseverance or long suffering with hope. And I think that's fascinating. It takes courage to persevere when you're under suffering, anxiety, and depression. When they grip a man in fear, and that it's the vice of, which is that vice of fortitude, it is hope and fortitude that really kicks you out of that state. So I'm going to address two very deep topics today. And I'm going to address, first of all, the sad statistics of the reality of suicide among men. So suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. In 2019, over 47,000 people committed suicide, and 1.38 million attempts of suicide in 2019. And this is where it gets real particular. The rate of suicide is highest among middle-aged white men. In 2019, men died by suicide over 3.5 times more often than women. White males accounted for over 69% of suicide deaths in 2019. But don't miss the hope at the bottom, right? That 93% of adults surveyed in the United States think that suicide can be prevented, and I think they are right. There are a few, though, of what I call identity thieves that actually lead us to this place, friends. And the Bible has some things to say about this thief. The thief comes only to steal, to kill, and destroy. But Jesus said, I came that they may have life and may have it abundantly. Well, those identity thieves are trying to rob us of our identity of Christ and of our anchor in that links to that rock when we have the storms of life. Well, there's two kinds of enemies. So right here, you have this little avatar there on the right. So my kids had created this avatar for me on the Wii, and believe me, I appreciate all the brown hair. There's hope that I have when I saw that avatar. This got me thinking that we men tend to take on avatars, this false identity, if you will, that's given to us by these identity thieves. First, the enemy is on the outside of us, right? People putting labels on you, right? People have label makers, and they put labels on us. You're nothing but a fill in the blank. You have blank disorder. You're a mistake. You're a blankaholic. You'll never be. And personal and cyberbullying, unlike 2 decades ago, right? The cyberbullying lasts with you forever. You used to be able to get away from the bully if you're a Gen Xer and Boomer, right? Just by going home, and you pop back out, you don't see him until the next day. But here it lasts forever. And friends, this really has a big impact on us, but it really doesn't impact us until we internalize it. And friends, I'm in the cybersecurity field, and I can tell you, man, that the most dangerous threat is the insider threat. The same truth applies with us, and I call this insider threat ants. Ants are automatic negative thoughts. So let's see what happens. You start embracing those labels, and you place them on yourself by internalizing that message. Friends, you have to kill your ants. Automatic negative thoughts means having that same negative audio file playing over and over and over again. It's like this background noise that just haunts you. Instead of a white noise, it's almost like a dark despair type of noise. It just constantly is playing over and over, and you camp on those thoughts. Friends, your brain only burns 400 calories a day. I wish it burned more. So if you spend all those calories on these ants, you'll never have energy left to do anything. And that leads you into despair. So I'm going to actually reverse my teaching today. I'm going to tell you how to be a man of despair. Hey, if you want to be a man of despair and not hope, I want you to do these things, right? Do these things. Endure suffering all alone without God and without his people. The world was shocked at the suicide of funny man Robin Williams. I find myself getting emotional to my own surprise. Well, why? Well, because he was funny. And we believe that making people smile is a reflection of one's own happiness. As a man who used humor his whole life to cover pain, I can sympathize with this great comedian. The sad thing about Robin Williams was that he was trapped in a cycle of despair that humor, alcohol, and drugs medicated, but never eradicated. Anxiety and depression are two forms of despair in this life that even the Christian is not immune from. And the Bible makes this clear in Psalm 42. The psalmist was not immune from this. So look at this psalm. My tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all day long, where is your God? These things I remember, and I pour out my soul within me. For I used to go along with the throng and lead them in procession to the house of God, with the voice of joy and thanksgiving, a multitude keeping festival. Why are you in despair, O my soul? And why have you become disturbed within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him for the help of his presence. Oh my God, my soul is despaired within me. You look how it starts off. It starts off with doubt about God in the midst of despair. But look at that phrase. Don't miss it. The psalmist isolated himself. For I used to go along with the throng. Notice that isolation. I have a very close Christian friend of mine who was gripped in a pit of anxiety attacks. And he'd have this, he'd plagued with this throughout his life. And it was this, it would start with camping on those ants and it would just overtake him. And he was in a bad place. So I told him, hey, I'm on my way. I went over his house. I prayed for him. I was just present. I didn't have any magical verse to throw at him. I didn't have any magical thing to toss his way. No sprinkles to put on that despair that he was living in. I prayed with him. I prayed for him. And I slept on the floor. When he woke up, I was up and we were talking and chatting again. I wanted him to know that I love him and that he's not alone. Well, this meets with new levels of studies about face-to-face interaction. And my friend will tell you that next day there was a pivot. There was a pivot in his life, and he got through that season. And he hasn't had one since. This face-to-face social contact, if you don't have it, it can double your depression risk. Researchers find that people who meet friends and families 3 times a week are far less likely to have depression than those who have only virtual contact. Dr. Alan Teo, he's a lead author and assistant professor of psychiatry at the Oregon Health and Science University, said this, quote, we found that not all forms of socialization are equal. Phone calls, digital communication with friends and family members do not have the same power as face-to-face social interactions in helping to stave off depression. Friends, I wonder what 2020 looks like with this isolation, what the statistics will be. And this leads me to another friend of mine. There's a great quote by C.S. Lewis regarding friendship. And it says this, friendship is born at the moment when one person says to another, what, you two? I thought I was the only one. And this is the case when I met Dennis, my non-Christian friend with whom I loved as a brother. We just clicked on so many levels. He may not have been a Christian, but he had a deep respect for these virtues. He was so fascinated by them. Well, 3 years ago, my friend Dennis committed suicide. His world came crashing down when, as a final straw, his wife filed for divorce. What Dennis did was self-isolate and did not let me in. I reached out to him constantly, every day of the week, a couple times a day. Then I went to several days a week, constantly for months and months and months, reaching out to him. And when he finally committed suicide, his wife thanked me for reaching out to him. But I saw Dennis one time only. And he did exactly what he did as a child, is he isolated and tried to deal with everything by himself. He had lost like 70 pounds. It was crazy. I had dinner with him, and little do I know that was the last time I would ever see him. He solved nothing. and left his kids behind the mess. I feel sorry for him in some sense, but frankly, I find myself ticked off at him for the selfish, unnecessary, permanent solution to a temporary problem. He didn't have an anchor in his life, and he isolated himself from a friend who actually wanted to help. He rejected all forms of help in his despair. And this leads me to the question of, what does help look like outside of connecting to a friend who cares about you? Well, it actually depends on how you view what it means to be human. And this leads me into the philosophy of the mind, which I unpack a little bit in the book. It's really important to understand there's really two views. At first, there's the unbiblical view, which is the materialist view. This is kind of popular today, where your body, where the brain, the mind is just epiphenomenal, they'll say. It's just a product of the brain, right? So it's just kind of like a result of the brain. So you can reduce everything to the chemical, personality, emotions. There's no free will. You're just basically a slave to your genes or your chemicals. Well, then there's the biblical view, which is still, you'll be surprised, very popular, and actually has most of the science behind it, where you are a body and a soul composite, where the mind is independent from the brain, but linked to it. Your personality and emotions, free will and conscience are all kind of linked. This is called dualism. Well, what you don't know, some of the most famous scientists who study the mind and the brain are dualists. Charles Sherrington, for example, who is considered the father of neuroscience itself. You never have neuroscience without the dualist Charles Sherrington. Neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield, who's considered the father of modern epilepsy surgery. Sir John Achilles, who is a Nobel laureate in medicine for his groundbreaking work on a functioning of neural synapses. This is the whole reason why we understand neural synapses. Neuroscientist Jeffrey Schwartz, who documented evidence, now get this, that mental states, i.e. the mind, show measurable changes in brain function. In fact, there's properties of mind that cannot be reduced to the material. The bottom line, men, is that our material brain is read-write and not read-only. Philosophically today, as Madonna would say, we're in a material world. Thus, our modern approach to mental health commits what is known as a reductive fallacy. So a reductive fallacy is when you reduce the explanation of something to only one aspect of it, and you remove the whole. So you make that as if it has explanatory power for everything. If you watch the news, there's a reductive fallacies constantly. They live on it. But we know intuitively the human behavior makes the most sense when we explain it in terms of meaning, purpose, desires, beliefs, and choices, not chemicals and molecules and volts and wires and motion. That's how I explain my computer, not how I explain me as a human. So let me illustrate the impact of believing that we are simply material beings where the mind is reduced to the physical brain. And this gets into the topic of anxiety and depression. On this slide, I'll have a couple resources to recommend, which take a whole man approach to dealing with anxiety and depression, instead of this minimalist approach that assumes materialism. As many of you know, either personally or through relationships, anxiety and depression are real problems. And friends, real problems require real solutions. And as the previous slide made clear, what you determine as a real solution depends upon the philosophy or the worldview you bring to the problem. As C.S. Lewis says, good philosophy must exist for no other reason than bad philosophy needs to be answered. I can promise you that in this post-Christian material world, that quick fix solutions that address the effect of just feeling better and not the cause itself is really where we're at today. Well, why? Well, because most, quote, experts were brought up in our seminaries of secularism, the modern university, where they are trained as materialists. I love this visual by Bob Phillips in his wonderful book, but I have one minor but extremely important edit that you'll see in a moment that I make when I get to the biblical perspective. If you embrace the philosophy of materialism, then you'll limit your solution to material one only, the medication only approach, which is rooted into this medical model. So let me kind of pop through this, because this leads to despair and label making, an identity thief that you'll embrace. So if you pop down a medical model, it goes like this. You have a mental illness or disease as identified, cause, right? They say, well, it's like there's a chemical imbalance in the body. Then there's a mental and emotional disruption and you'll see these physical symptoms and acting out behaviors. Course of action, if you embrace this, you tend to seek outside blame for the emotions and behavior. prescribed drugs alone to deal with the problem. And then the end result, you tend to give over your care to someone else. You give control of your life over to another. Well, this leads to despair. Despair, no doubt about it. Then there's this second approach called the counseling model. So this is important that you see through this. This counseling model has it. There's same thing, right? There's a mental disorder, a maladaptation, build up of stress from many sources. And I could talk about this when I went through what I consider like a mild form of depression. I had so many things that hit me at once that it just rocked me. There's a mental emotional disruption. There's physical symptoms and acting out behaviors. Well, then the course of action, right? Depending on it, right? You tendency to take ownership of your emotions, say what's going on and behavior. Then you watch healthy apart. Look, you're healthy apart from what? Taking drugs only. This is a very important addition. The end result is you take responsibility. You become your own doctor. You kind of take control of your life. You try to figure out what's going on. There are two extremes that people take, right? Or this is a false dilemma, right? The one extreme is the medication only extreme, which denies the existence of the soul. And then there's the other extreme, which is the no medication at all approach, which denies the reality of the fall's impact on the body. So this is important, friends, because as the Bible says, the man who fears God will avoid all extremes. You need relationships with other men. You need healthy food choices, exercise, and yes, at times, medication for a short period of time. If you just kind of just take the medication, you'll be playing whack-a-weasel. They will change it constantly, I promise you, because you aren't dealing with the cause but the effect, and you'll pop up constantly. A wise man avoids all extremes. Well, what if we did this approach for heart disease, right? What if we said, well, I have heart disease, I'm just going to take a pill? Or no, I don't want to do that medication stuff. What if I have heart disease? I'm just going to exercise and eat better. Friends, we don't do this minimalist approach to those health problems. So why do we do it with mental health problems? Take a holistic approach. And sometimes what happens is we do nothing because we embrace a lie. So I love this quote by C.S. Lewis when it has to deal with these anxieties. Some people feel guilty about their anxieties and regard them as a defect of the faith. I don't agree at all. They are afflictions, not sins. Like all afflictions, they are, if we can so take them, our share in the passion of Christ. And this leads me to perseverance, which I said is a property I would focus on. Romans 5:3-5 says this: we also exalt in our tribulation, knowing that tribulation brings about perseverance. What a way to look at tribulation. Perseverance, proven character, is you really know the quality of your faith, just like you know the quality of a metal when it's put under hot temperature. And proven character does what? Hope. And hope does not disappoint. Romans 8:24-25 says, for in hope we have been saved. But hope that is seen is not hope. But if we hope for what we do see, with perseverance, we wait eagerly for it. From these two verses, we see that perseverance is a key property of hope when one is experiencing suffering, such as anxiety and depression. Perseverance implies patience, and it's a very specific kind of patience called long-suffering. Sometimes what kicks off deep despair is when we experience loss. And this leads to the second way to be a man of despair. Hey, if you want to be a man of despair, live in isolation apart from God and his people, and then do this second thing. When you have a loss, lose your eternal perspective. This tombstone catches hope like no other. Art is powerful when it's used in its proper form, pointing to a reality, pointing beyond itself to reality. This is a tombstone of Matthew. He was 11 years old when he died, and he was blind and paralyzed from the neck down from the time of his birth. 11 years he lived in this condition, and his parents took care of him in this condition. His dad designed this powerful tombstone expressing hope. Can you imagine walking through a graveyard and seeing this depiction? Friends, that is powerful. This man didn't lose hope. 1 Thessalonians 4:13 and 14 tells us, but we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who have fallen asleep, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. Does it say do not grieve? No, there's a time to grieve. I mean, yes, I get the celebration of life ceremonies. That's a great positive way to look at it, but you must grieve. But don't grieve as one who has no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and I hope you believe that, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Christ. C.S. Lewis captured our problem today when he said this, quote, "It is since Christians have largely ceased to think of the other world that they have become so ineffective in this one. Let us not do this, men." So, do you want to be men of despair? I hope you're saying no. Do you want to be a man of hope and not despair? Well, do the opposite. Do these two things. Find an anchor. Galatians 6:2 says, bear one another's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. Did you pick that up? Bear one another's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. I had a good friend of mine, Kelly. He was really close with his oldest son. Well, he is really close. I shouldn't speak in past tense. Kelly's really close with his oldest son, and he has 4 daughters. So his son was heading off, and I like to kind of pick some fruit from other Christian men who are ahead of me in life, especially since I'm kind of starting this faith journey as the first generation Christian. And I said, hey, do you have any regrets or anything? You know, my son at the time was a sophomore. As your kid went off to college, you know, or do you have any regrets or anything, you know, that you felt you did well, or things you wish you would have done now that you're at this space? And so, well, I got to tell you, Pete, he said, not regarding Kelly and my relationship with Kelly, actually. He said, we did lots of things together. We shared a love of music. We served in youth together. He said, but I really wish I would have developed male friendships because I'm alone. I miss them. I mean, I took that to heart. And I said, man, I know this from doing ministry that men, we're terrible at this. We tend to do other things and tasks, but we don't build up those male relationships. So I made it a goal to build strong male friendships from that time on. And I started a men's small group with a friend of mine. And I said, hey, look, I want to have a small group with other strong men. And let's do that so we can have some shoulder to shoulder time. Kelly's part of that small group, and we've been meeting together for like 5 years now. And I love that group. Yep. We are consistently inconsistent when we meet. We meet, we miss, we meet, we miss. But guess what? Something's better than nothing as we're moving along and doing life together. And those guys have become some of my very best friends. Great group of men that I'm doing life together with. Second thing, don't lose your eternal perspective. Remember that you have a no-so hope, not a hope-so hope. This is a fact that Jesus rose from the dead on the 3rd day for us as our living hope, and he intercesses for us today. So if you want to be a man of hope and not despair, I challenge you. It's never too late. I challenge you to find an anchor and don't lose your eternal perspective. So I'm handing